Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. The rain had been falling since dawn. Not the violent kind that lashes at windows, but a steady, unrelenting drizzle that blurred the world into soft edges and shadows. The city seemed quieter beneath it, as if even the restless streets were willing to pause, listening to the sky empty itself. David sat by the window of his small apartment, watching the rivulets crawl down the glass. The cup of tea in his hands had gone cold long ago, but he hadn't noticed. His eyes weren't really on the street below, but somewhere far away, behind the curtain of rain, behind the gray of the day, locked in the past. It was on mornings like this, hushed and heavy, that memories returned uninvited. The warmth of laughter, the sharp sting of words spoken in anger, the echo of footsteps leaving a room. They came in fragments, cruel in their suddenness, and David would sit frozen, as though his stillness could keep them from cutting deeper. He rubbed his thumb along the rim of the mug, grounding himself in the small, ordinary gesture. The apartment smelled faintly of damp wool and yesterday's coffee grounds. A stack of unopened letters lay on the table, bills most likely, though he hadn't dared confirm. The world outside asked things of him: decisions, responsibilities, courage. Inside, silence asked for nothing, and that was easier. But silence could be cruel too. A knock came at the door, soft, hesitant, then firmer. David's head turned, surprise flashing across his tired features. No one ever came by without warning. For a long moment he didn't move, as if hoping the sound had been imagined. But the knock came again. 3 measured raps, polite, insistent. Setting the mug down, he rose, his body stiff from hours of stillness. His bare feet made no sound on the worn wooden floor. At the door he hesitated, hand hovering above the latch. He felt the strange nervousness of opening one's world to whatever stood on the other side. When he finally...
David's fingers tightened on the doorframe. For a second, he thought the sight before him was a cruel trick of memory, a ghost conjured by the rain. But no, she was real. The water glistened on her eyelashes. Her breath clouded faintly in the cool corridor air. He hadn't heard her name spoken in so long that he almost feared to break the silence with it. His throat felt dry, heavy. "Emily," he whispered. The sound of it seemed to ripple through the air, soft yet sharp. Her eyes flickered, as though the name stirred something she had carefully kept buried. She didn't smile. She didn't look away either. "I shouldn't have come," she murmured, lowering her gaze briefly. Then, almost apologetically, "But I had nowhere else to go." Her words landed like stones dropped into water, sinking deep into him. David's pulse quickened, the old ache returning in waves. For a long moment, he didn't move. The rain hissed against the building. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. Finally, he stepped aside, his voice rough. "Come in." She moved past him, careful, as though she feared her presence might shatter something fragile. The umbrella leaned against the wall with a soft clatter, her coat dripping onto the worn floorboards. David shut the door, sealing the world out, but inside his chest, the world had already changed. The room felt smaller with her in it, not from her size, but from her history. She carried with her the weight of everything left unsaid, and the silence between them was louder than any storm. Emily's eyes wandered the apartment, the bare table, the stack of unopened letters, the cracked lamp in the corner. A life reduced to quiet necessities. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly, but she said nothing. David busied himself with the only act of courtesy he knew. "Do you want tea?" Her lips parted, and for a second he thought she would refuse. Then she nodded faintly. "Yes, please." He moved into the small kitchen, filling the kettle with hands that trembled just enough to annoy him. Behind him, he could feel her presence, could hear the faint rustle as she folded her coat over the back of a chair. When the kettle began to hum, he forced himself to speak, his voice steadying against the silence. "It's been years." "Yes," she replied softly. Her words carried both distance and longing. He turned, setting 2 cups on the counter. "Why now?" Emily met his eyes, and in them he saw exhaustion, shadows, and something else, desperation. "Because I can't carry it alone anymore." she whispered. The kettle whistled, a sharp, shrill sound that broke the moment. David turned back quickly, pouring the boiling water, grateful for the distraction. His mind churned. Carrie what? What truth had driven her here, to his door, after all this time? When he placed the steaming cup in front of her, she cradled it between her hands, but didn't drink. Her fingers trembled. Finally, she lifted her gaze. There's something you never knew, she said. Her voice was quiet, but each word struck with the weight of revelation. About us. About the life we almost had. David froze, every nerve in him pulled taut. The rain outside drummed harder against the glass, as though urging the confession to fall. The words hovered in the air like smoke, fragile and heavy at once. David sat down across from her, the wooden chair creaking beneath his weight. His hands pressed against his knees, trying to ground himself. Emily's eyes lingered on the rising steam from the tea, as if she needed the swirling vapor to shield her from his gaze. When she finally looked up, her voice carried a tremor, though her face remained calm. You never knew, because I never told you. David leaned forward slightly. His jaw tightened, the veins in his neck visible in the low light. Told me what? Her lips trembled. She set the teacup down carefully, almost reverently, as though it might shatter in her hands. Then she drew in a breath, her shoulders lifting, her chest trembling under the weight of unspoken years. I was pregnant, David. The words fell like a blade. David's world contracted into silence. The rain against the window, the faint hum of the radiator, even the sound of his own heartbeat, all of it dissolved until only her voice remained, echoing inside him. He blinked, the breath caught in his throat. His lips parted, but no sound came. At last, a hoarse whisper escaped. You what? I was carrying your child, Emily said, each word soaked in guilt. I didn't know how to tell you back then. Everything between us was so fragile, already breaking apart. And then, she swallowed, her eyes glistening though no tears yet fell. Then I was afraid. Afraid of what it would do to you. To us. So I ran. David's chair scraped harshly against the floor as he stood. His hands moved to his head, clutching at his hair as though trying to keep his skull from splitting open. You left, he muttered, his voice hollow. You left without a word, and all this time. Emily rose too, her face pale, her voice urgent. I thought I was protecting you. You had just lost your father, you were drowning in debt, and I didn't think you could carry me too. Her words cracked, her control slipping. Finally, tears welled, spilling down her cheeks. I made the wrong choice. I see that now. Every day since then, I've seen it. David turned toward the window, his reflection fractured in the glass, blurred by the trails of rain. He felt as if the floor beneath him had tilted, pulling him into an abyss he had never known was waiting. A child, he whispered, almost to himself. His voice was rough, distant. We could have had a child. Emily's sob caught in her throat. Yes. The silence stretched, unbearable and suffocating. David pressed his palms against the window pane, the cold seeping into his skin, anchoring him to the present. After what felt like a lifetime, he turned, his eyes raw, filled with both fury and devastation. What happened? He asked, his voice low but edged like glass. Emily hesitated, her lips trembling as she searched for the words. I lost her, she finally said, her voice breaking on the last word. A daughter. She never made it. And I carried that grief alone. I thought I deserved to. The admission shattered something in the room. Not the furniture, not the fragile truce of silence, but something in David's chest. He staggered back a step, covering his mouth with his hand. His breath came ragged, shallow. For years, he had lived inside the ruins of their broken love, never knowing that beneath those ruins lay another grave. Emily, trembling, reached out a hand toward him, hesitant, pleading. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she whispered. I just couldn't keep it hidden anymore. I couldn't keep her hidden anymore. David looked at her hand, but didn't take it. His body shook as if caught between rage and collapse. The rain outside softened, its fury waning into a steady rhythm, as though even the storm recognized the exhaustion in the room. David finally lowered his hand, his voice almost a growl. You should have told me. Emily's tears glistened in the dim light. I know. And in that moment, between them stretched not only the years of silence, but the shadow of the child who might have been. The silence after her confession was suffocating, yet fragile, like the hush in a chapel after prayers have been spoken. David remained by the window, his figure a dark silhouette against the pale drizzle outside. Emily stood rooted near the table, her fingers clutching the edge as if she might collapse without it. Minutes stretched, the clock ticking softly on the wall, marking time that no longer felt real. At last, David turned. His eyes, storm-dark, rimmed red, fell on her. There was no mask left, no distance. Only a man standing before the wreckage of a life he never knew was his. "When I used to picture us," he said, voice low and hoarse, "I thought about the small things. You laughing in the kitchen, the way your hair smelled after the rain. I thought if I held on to those, I could survive your leaving. But now," he stopped, shaking his head, words failing. "Now it feels like I didn't just lose you. I lost her too, and I didn't even know she existed." Emily's breath caught. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, unable to hold back the sob that broke free. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I'm so sorry, David." For a moment, he wanted to recoil from her sorrow, to shield himself from its gravity. But then he saw it. Not the polished, composed woman she often presented to the world, but a broken soul, haunted by choices she couldn't undo. Slowly, he stepped closer. His movements were hesitant, as though his body resisted what his heart demanded. When he finally stood before her, close enough to see the quiver of her lip and the sheen of tears in her lashes, he asked the question that had been burning in his chest. "Why tell me now?" Emily swallowed hard. "Because I can't carry it anymore. Because every time I see you, even across the street, even in passing, I feel the weight of what I took from you. You deserve to know, even if it makes you hate me." David's jaw tightened. Hate. The word curled in his chest, heavy and foreign. Did he hate her? No. The truth was worse. He still loved her, and that love was now tangled with grief too deep to name. His hand lifted slightly, as if to touch her, but stopped in the air. His fingers hovered near her cheek, trembling, then retreated. "I don't know what to do with this," he admitted, his voice stripped bare. "I don't know how to breathe with it inside me." Emily's shoulders sagged, her gaze falling to the floor. "Then let me carry it with you. Please. Just this once, don't make me do it alone." The plea settled between them, raw and desperate. David looked at her for a long time, his chest rising and falling with the effort of holding himself together. Then, slowly, cautiously, he lowered himself into the chair again. His hand pressed against his temple as if trying to hold back the tide of grief. Emily followed, sitting across from him. The distance between them felt immeasurable and yet suddenly fragile enough to cross. For the first time that evening, David didn't look at her with anger. He looked at her with exhaustion, with longing, with the ache of someone who had finally been given the truth but didn't yet know what to do with it. And in the hush of that moment, something shifted. The wound was still open, bleeding, but it was no longer hidden. The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, the clouds thinning, allowing the faintest trace of moonlight to pierce the night. Emily whispered, "Do you remember the night we watched the fireflies?" David's lips parted, caught off guard. The memory struck him like a soft blow, a humid summer evening, a field glowing with tiny flickers of light, her laughter ringing like bells. "Yes," he said, his voice unsteady. Her eyes lifted, glistening, fragile. "That was the night I realized I loved you, and the night I swore I'd never hurt you. I broke that promise, but I want you to know it was real. All of it was real." Something inside David gave way, not forgiveness, not yet, but a loosening of the iron grip around his heart. He leaned back, his eyes wet. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said, honest, trembling. "But I can't deny it was real either." The words were jagged, imperfect, but they were a beginning. And as the night deepened, and the storm moved further into the distance, two broken souls sat facing one another across a worn wooden table, breathing the same air again for the first time in years. Not healed, not whole, but no longer hidden. The night had grown heavy, but not in the way storms weigh down the world. This was a different kind of heaviness, quieter, tender in its ache. The rain had stopped, leaving the smell of wet earth and the faint sound of water dripping from the eaves. Inside, the old house seemed to breathe again, its walls creaking softly as if relieved to hold such a fragile reunion. David sat hunched in the chair, staring down at his hands. They looked unfamiliar to him, older somehow, scarred by years of holding on to bitterness and grief. He flexed them slowly, as though searching for a way to release something he no longer knew how to carry. Emily sat across from him, her back straight, her fingers clasped tightly together on the table. Every so often her eyes lifted to him, then dropped quickly, afraid of meeting his gaze too long. Yet she couldn't look away entirely. It was as if his presence pulled her in, the same way it always had, despite the ruin between them. At last, David spoke. His voice was lower now, gentler, though it trembled at the edges. "What's her name?" Emily blinked, startled. For a moment she didn't answer, as if afraid to say it aloud. Then, with a breath that shivered through her, she whispered, "Grace." The name fell into the room like a candle being lit in the dark. David closed his eyes. Grace, a name he had never known, yet it carried the echo of his own lost years. "Grace," he repeated, almost reverently. "She would have been mine." Emily's throat tightened. "She is yours," she said softly. "Even if you never knew her, she carries you. Your eyes, your quiet way, the way she tilts her head when she's listening." His hands trembled. He pressed them against his face, and for the first time since she had entered, his shoulders shook, not with anger, but with grief breaking free. A sound escaped him, raw and unguarded, like a wound tearing open. Emily rose slowly, hesitantly. For a moment, she hovered behind him, her hand hovering above his shoulder. She was terrified to touch him, terrified he would push her away. Yet when his sob deepened, she lowered her palm gently onto his back. He flinched at first, but then he didn't move. Her hand stayed there, trembling, offering nothing but warmth. "I know I don't deserve this," she whispered. "But I need you to know, every day of my life, I've loved you. Even when I was too weak, too afraid, too broken to show it. I never stopped." David's breath caught. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his head, his face wet with tears. He turned just enough to look at her, and in his eyes there was no longer only anger. There was weariness, there was longing, there was the ghost of something that might one day become forgiveness. "You took everything from me," he said, his voice breaking. "But you're the only one who ever felt like home." The words struck them both like a confession neither expected. Emily's chest rose sharply, her tears spilling freely now. She sank down beside him, no longer across the table, but close enough to feel the warmth of his grief. Their shoulders touched, just slightly, the way two wounded people might lean against each other when too tired to stand alone. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not the silence of walls or secrets, but the silence of a pause. A fragile space where something new, something unbearably tender, might begin. The moonlight had grown stronger, spilling through the curtains, illuminating the worn table, the chairs, the dust motes hanging like tiny stars in the air. Outside, the world was quiet. Inside, two broken hearts sat side by side, closer than they had been in years. The house was so quiet now that even the ticking of the clocks sounded softer, as though it, too, were holding its breath. David and Emily sat close, their shoulders brushing, neither daring to move away. The years between them felt impossibly vast, yet in that fragile silence, there was the faintest sense that not everything was lost. Emily's gaze drifted to the worn wooden floor, then slowly to the window where the rain had left streaks like faint scars on the glass. Her voice, when it came, was low and careful, as if she were afraid the memory might shatter in the air. "Do you remember," she whispered, "the old mango tree in the courtyard?" David's lips curved, not quite into a smile, but into something gentler than sorrow. He nodded slowly. "I remember. You used to sit under it with your sketchbook. You'd get so angry when I tried to peek at your drawings." A quiet laugh escaped Emily, soft and brittle. "I never wanted you to see them because they were always of you." He turned his head sharply, his eyes searching her face. The truth in her voice cut deeper than he expected, but not with pain. More like the ache of something long buried, unearthed in the dark. "You never told me that," he said quietly. "I told myself you knew," she answered. "That you felt it. But maybe I was wrong." David let out a breath, heavy and uneven. His mind drifted, unbidden, to those summer afternoons, the tree heavy with fruit, the air warm with cicadas, her presence a constant hum beside him. He remembered her laughter, the way her hair caught the sun, the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. For the first time in years, the memory didn't sting as sharply. It glowed faintly, like an ember refusing to die. "I knew," he said at last. His voice was soft, steady now. "I just didn't know how much it meant until it was gone." Emily's chest rose with a sharp breath, and she turned her face slightly toward him. The moonlight lit her features, casting shadows across her cheeks. There was no makeup now, no practiced composure. Only the raw, unguarded woman who once sat under a mango tree sketching the man she loved. David's hand twitched against his knee, the urge to reach for her overwhelming. He clenched it instead, afraid of moving too fast, of breaking the fragile thread holding them together. Still, the air between them shifted. For the first time that night, they weren't speaking only of pain. They were remembering. And memory, though fragile, had a way of softening even the deepest scars. Outside, the rain had fully ceased. The night was clear, and a faint chorus of crickets filled the darkness. It was the same sound that had filled their youth, echoing now like a reminder that time could bend, if only for a moment, to bring the past into the present. Emily's voice broke the silence again, barely above a whisper. "I thought those days were gone forever, that we could never sit like this again." David turned fully toward her this time. His eyes, though heavy with grief, carried a softness she hadn't seen in years. "Maybe not gone," he said. "Maybe just waiting." The words hung between them, uncertain yet filled with a quiet hope neither dared to claim. And for the first time, both of them allowed themselves to sit in that hope, if only for a moment. The night deepened around them, yet inside the old house, time felt suspended, as though the walls, the creaking beams, even the silent shadows wished to keep them in this fragile pause forever. David leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes drifting toward the window where the moon glowed pale against the thinning clouds. He had forgotten what it felt like to sit in silence with her, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as something else, something that still defied the ruin between them. Emily folded her hands together on the table, but her fingers wouldn't stop trembling. She wanted to reach across, to close the distance, but she was terrified. Terrified that if she touched him, he might recoil. That if she broke this careful stillness, everything would collapse again. So instead she spoke, her voice barely steady. "I used to dream," she confessed. "Even after I left. I would wake up in strange places, in cold beds, and in the dream you were still there beside me. You were laughing. Or sometimes you were just quiet, but there. And I would wake up, and it would break me all over again." Her words hung heavy in the air. David didn't answer immediately. His throat worked as though he were swallowing something sharp. He wanted to tell her that he, too, had been haunted. That even in his anger, even in his fury, her absence had carved hollows in his life that nothing could fill. Instead, he asked something else. "Why did you come back tonight?" Emily's eyes closed, a tear slipping free before she could stop it. "Because I couldn't carry it anymore. The distance, the silence, the years of pretending I had moved on. I was afraid you'd slam the door in my face, but I was more afraid of dying with these words still locked inside me." David's chest tightened. He turned toward her fully now, studying her face as if searching for the girl he once knew beneath the years of sorrow. And for the briefest moment, he saw her. He saw the woman who once ran barefoot across the yard, laughing with her arms outstretched. He saw the woman who fell asleep with her head against his shoulder beneath the mango tree. He saw not only the one who had betrayed him, but the one who had loved him fiercely, foolishly, and with a heart too fragile for this world. His hand moved before he could stop it. Slowly, uncertainly, it reached across the table. His fingers brushed against hers, feather-light, as though testing whether the contact would burn. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. Her fingers trembled under his touch, but she didn't pull away. For a moment, neither moved. His rough hand resting against hers, her slender fingers trembling but staying. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. But it was something, a bridge forming out of the wreckage, fragile as glass yet real beneath their skin. Emily finally let out a breath, shaky and broken. Her eyes met his, shimmering in the dim light. "Does this mean," she whispered, "that there's still a place for me?" David's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away, because the truth was too large, too heavy. But his hand pressed a little firmer against hers, his thumb brushing just slightly over her knuckles. And though his lips never formed the words, his touch spoke what his voice could not. Emily closed her eyes, letting the silence cradle her. For the first time in years, she felt the faintest stirrings of belonging. The night outside stretched on, but inside, something long thought dead was breathing again. Morning light filtered through the cracks in the blinds, soft and tentative, as if afraid to startle the fragile peace inside the room. Emily had stayed awake most of the night, her head leaning lightly against the table, her fingers still intertwined with David's. For once, the weight of years felt less like a burden and more like a bridge, shaky, yet real. David finally broke the silence, his voice low, almost trembling. "I didn't know if I could trust myself, or you," he admitted. "After everything, after the walls we built around our hearts." Emily opened her eyes slowly. Sunlight caught the tears at the corners, making them sparkle. "I didn't trust myself either. I thought leaving was the only way to survive. I thought maybe we were broken beyond repair." He shook his head. "We were, and yet, here we are, sitting across from each other, hands still, touching. Somehow that's not nothing." Emily's lips curved into a tentative smile. "It's more than I dared to hope for." David exhaled, a long, shaky release, as if he had been holding a lifetime of regret in his lungs. He stood, and without a word, reached down to help Emily to her feet. Their eyes met, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "Then let's not waste any more time," he said softly, almost to himself. "Let's try? Really try this time." Her eyes glistened, a mix of relief and fear, but she nodded. "I want that more than anything." Outside, the sun climbed higher, spilling light into the once shadowed corners of the room. The air carried a hint of spring, fresh and full of possibilities. Even the walls seemed to lean closer, as if approving this fragile reclamation of love. David stepped closer, careful, respectful, yet filled with the longing of years lost. Emily didn't pull back. She allowed herself to be close, to feel the warmth of someone who had once been her whole world and could be again. For the first time in a long time, they laughed, softly, uncertainly, but genuinely. The sound echoed against the walls and through the open windows, mingling with the sunlight. It wasn't a grand celebration. There were no fireworks, no declarations of forever. Just two people, scarred but alive, rediscovering each other one moment at a time. And as they stood together, hand in hand, the past shadow receded slightly, leaving room for something new, something tender, something unbroken. It was not perfect. Perhaps it never would be. But it was theirs. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The quiet joy of rediscovery wrapped around them, a fragile but persistent flame. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, they had found a way back to each other, and to the possibility of home, of family, and of love renewed.